Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and today we're diving into the enchanting and sometimes treacherous world of fairies, the fae, the fair folk, the she, or as some like to call them, those we don't fuck with.
I'm scared. I'm just saying. I'm scared. I'm Chelle, and we're going to talk about the fae today. I love the fae, but definitely this is a fuck around and find out kind of thing.
What we're talking about is fairies. Some people see them as elemental forces or animistic forces, but fairies are mythical creatures that are anthropomorphic, which means that they look like people. They usually have human form of some type, either smaller, larger, more grotesque, more beautiful, but definitely human in nature. And they appear all over the world in folklore. Most European countries, French, Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, they've been Norse traditions, Native American traditions. They have been in history separated into different classifications, like the Seelie and the Unseelie court, which is in most like Irish, Scottish, and Welsh folklore. A lot of this is going to be very local and very traditional to the area that they're in, because again, these animistic forces. But in, I guess it was like the 13th century, according to Wikipedia, a gentleman named Thomas of Cantimpré classified the fairies into water fairies, earth fairies, under-earth fairies, and air fairies.
Yep.
At least by this one guy.
Right.
I think some people, especially, I know sometimes we give TikTok a hard time, but I think online, the fae have kind of been blown up into even scarier than I think they are.
That I would agree with. I think that there's been so much caution put out there that people are like being like overly... The fae are being overly villainized, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. At first, I mean, you should have some caution, and we'll get into why later in the episode, but having a little bit of caution when dealing with the fae is wise, especially considering their history. But online the other day, I think I saw a mom tell their child that they don't do the tooth fairy because in this house, we don't fuck with the fae. And I thought that was taking it a little far.
That's kind of next level, I think. I mean, I don't fuck with the fae either, but let me tell you, the tooth fairy was present and accounted for both of my children's lives.
There you go. I think as long as you learn the folklore and things around fairies, it's okay to allow the tooth fairy into your house.
And, you know, you could say the same thing about you and I. Like, you and I are like the fae. You know, there's a limit, there's a line in the sand. And if you want to fuck around and find out, let's do this. But the fae can be wonderful, magical partners, I think is the best way to put it. A magical partner. Same with Hecate. This ain't no take. There has to be a give and take, or there are consequences. Bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to put it, because what we're talking about here is mainly elemental forces, animistic forces.
You know, and that's something I wanted to point out real quick. Sometimes people think, when people say working with the fae, that could mean a plethora of things. And some people are thinking like Tinkerbell with wings, but a lot of other, for lack of a better word, creatures fit under that fae umbrella, like trolls, goblins, nymphs, sprites. I'm sure I'm forgetting others.
Oh, there's hundreds, because they are found in almost every single culture.
They are.
If you scratch any folklore just a little bit, you're going to find a fairy creature of some type. Like you just said, there's the pukas, which is like an Irish or Celtic troublemaking shapeshifter. There's the red caps that are like evil, bloodthirsty little Scottish fairies. There's the Rusalka in Slavic folklore. There's the Via. I have a painting of her who's a Russian fairy. In Japan, they have a being called the yokai that's like a tree spirit. In Native American culture, some of them have these small, tiny little people that are nature spirits. Sometimes they're called the Nanahi. France has, of course, tall, beautiful fairies like Melusine. there's gnomes, there's elves, there's the she, there's banshees, there's all sorts of different type of
They're
fae.
not just little Tinkerbells with wings.
Oh, no, no, they come in every shape and size, and most of them are kind of scary. And I think that's a little bit where the we don't fuck with the fae idea has kind of come from, because TV and everything kind of took fairies to this Tinkerbell, like you said, the three fairies from
Cinderella.
yeah, there's the fairy godmother in Cinderella, and there's the three fairies from Sleeping Beauty.
But there's also Rumpelstiltskin, people.
That's true. They even took Maleficent, who was one of my favorite evil fairies, and turned her very good. Love those movies, don't get me wrong. I like the reimagining of Maleficent. But I think we took these creatures that were, in a lot of cases, tricksters and things you shouldn't fuck with, and we turned them into sugar plum fairies.
Right.
And the don't fuck with the fae, I think, was this backlash of, hello, there's things like red caps.
They were Disney-fied.
That's right. They're Disney-fied, and now it's kind of swung back very hard the other way.
Right. But the fae are great to work with, honestly, as long as you understand the give and take that you are undertaking.
I think when most witches and pagans talk about working with the fae, they're talking about one of two things. I think they're either talking about the she or the shining folk that a lot of people in Celtic and Welsh traditions talk about. They talk about the people under the hill, the Danu, the Tuatha Dé Danann. So they talk about these creatures. And the other one is the genus loci, the creatures of place, the animistic nature of a well or a glen or a tree or a wood, the
Right.
personification, like a house fairy, the personification of that place. So that's usually what they talk about, but they're, like you said, there are quite a few others.
I don't know. I see a lot of garden gnomes around town. I think people are working with these gnomes.
Gnomes are earth spirits. Gnomes are very much having to do with earth and with place and with your house. I mean, not too long ago, I lived in Rochester, New York, which is a hotbed of spiritualist and psychic activity. And the house that I lived in, at first I thought it might be haunted. And then after talking to some paranormal investigators, I think maybe there was some sort of weird fae activity. Let me back up. Chelle, have you ever set something down, like your keys or your glasses or your wallet, whatever, and you know for a fact you set it right next to
Those
you?
motherfuckers were right there and that they were gone. And then 4 hours later, guess what? They're right there again, even though I looked 80,000 times.
That's right. And I kept having things like this happen. I think we talked about it on one of our other podcasts where I made a purchase online and set the credit card down right next to me. And within minutes, I went to get it and it's
Who's
gone.
gone?
And I couldn't find it. The next morning, I found it in the sink, in between two dirty plates as I was doing dishes. That's so
I
weird.
remember that.
And let's see, my daughter also lost, I think it was a piece of jewelry, and she didn't find it until she pulled a storage bin out from under her bed, and it was in the middle of some clothes under her bed. So things are disappearing and showing up in weird places.
I don't know if the Fae wanted you to move or if they wanted to move with you.
Maybe. But once we started paying a little bit more attention to the spirits of the place, we made a little altar in a corner dedicated to the household spirits. This land had been owned by a man who worked it for gardens, and he had fruit trees, and he very much cared for the land. And I think it was feeling neglected. So when we created an altar to it, started doing things in the yard, dedicating it
It knew
to
you were
that.
listening, so it was pissed and it was trying to send you a message to tend to it.
And then once we did start tending to it, the energy in the home got a lot better and the tricks stopped. There is that type of fae. And that's something you don't want to piss off. You don't want to make the trickster in your home that's making all your things disappear mad.
And you know, it's funny you keep saying trickster because I used to always think of Loki. We've all heard of Loki. I used to think of Loki as like a offshoot of the Fae because of that trickster mindset that you get with Loki is similar to that trickster mindset of the Fae. But it's like, you know, things could either go great or they could go awry real quick.
Another part that comes from that is, again, the shining people, the Tuatha Dé Danann. They are much more longer lived than we are, if you follow this belief system. And they're much smarter than we are in a lot of cases. And they love to play games. Now, you have to be very careful with them because they do value making deals with people and fair exchanges, but they don't do any of that casually.
And that's kind of what I was talking about in the beginning about there's a give and take. Like I'm
Right.
talking about a materialistic give and take.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of times it is. If they give you something and you say thank you, they consider that that is now a binding agreement and you owe them something. Like you said, give and take.
They gave the sock away. That's it. They gave him a sock.
And if you get it back and say, oh, thank you, now you're in a binding agreement and you owe them something. And if you don't pay up, they get upset because they're very fair minded.
It's like the Christian version of signing your soul to the devil.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of is. You got to pay attention to what you're agreeing to if you ever enter into an agreement with the Fae. The good news is most of them are your typical backyard Fae. Like we did. We started taking better care of the overrun gardens in the backyard.
Right.
We set up a space in the home to honor the Fae. If you do simple things like that, clean up the creek near your house, volunteer at the park to clean it up, things like that, honoring the land is a very easy way to appease that type of Fae.
But because I'm paranoid, I would take it to the next level as well and also leave out an offering of something either shiny or sweet.
Yes.
Like a coin or whatever, something shiny. The Fae like shiny things. They're kind of like me. I like shiny things. Or like a little thing of honey. You know what I did one time, and this was the cutest thing. I took, you know how acorns, like the caps will fall off?
Hmm.
I had lined up like 4 or 5 caps and put honey and filled the caps with honey and left those out as offerings. Little acorn bowls of honey for them.
I think those are
Uh,
so cute.
but that's what I mean by give and take. There has to be some like literal materialistic give and take. And generally with the Fae, more often than not, you're doing all right if you do shiny or sweet.
That's always a good idea. And also be careful when you ask them for something, or if you make this offering and say, I'm giving you these acorn caps full of honey. Please make my garden bountiful or make my beehives overflow with honey
Be
because
very careful what you wish for and be very specific in your wording.
exactly, exactly. Because, you know, they might all of a sudden get your garden overrun with weeds or, you
Right.
know, your bees will now swarm and there'll be too many bees and it'll cause problems. So you do have to be kind of careful in how you word
Be
things.
specific, folks.
Now, fae are very much associated, like I said, with the genus loci, spirits of place, with liminal spaces, with magical spaces. If you go to these old stone circles, these are liminal spaces between this world and the magical world, and you will feel the presence of those local spirits and those fae there. Sometimes you can walk into the woods and you just feel like you're being watched around every tree and every corner. It just feels very much
That's
alive.
because you are.
That's right. Yeah, the fae of that place. The summertime is usually what I associate with the fae.
Absolutely, yeah.
Every time we would go to that ritual space in New York with our local community, you could feel it, particularly in the summertime when the fireflies are out. You know, it feels like a fae, liminal space kind of time.
Right, right. That was very much that felt like Feyland.
Yeah, so these in between places are really where you can connect with them. If you find a cool little waterfall, odds are there's a local fae there or there's energy there that you can tap into.
Some sort of water sprite or something. Yep.
Now, you don't need to believe that these are actual human looking creatures that walk the earth, that hide under hills and in moonbeams. You don't have to believe that the banshee is a female form that will come out and scream from the rooftops when someone that you love is going to die. You can believe that. Some people do. Some people believe that they are energies of place that are so old that they have almost a sentient feeling to them. But however you believe in these creatures, you can work with those energies. My favorite way to do it is personal. I very much love, especially now that I'm living out in the wilds of Pennsylvania, getting to know the little pockets of my land and the different energies associated with that has been a lot of fun. You know, so far I'm just finding different places to meditate or maybe do card pulls or, you know, go berry picking and just kind of be with that place. You know, you don't have to do anything fancy. You can just kind of connect with where you're at.
You have lots of spirits of your new place, and let me tell you, they're not all Fey.
Yes, actually, okay, tangent since you brought that up. Chelle has been to my lovely new property, and we have started constructing a ritual circle in the woods in the back, which is
And we were being watched, and we were being watched by lots of people that weren't technically there.
fun part with this land, as I've mentioned before, is it is an old church. So the house itself was the old church, and it was rebuilt on the same land. So there is a churchyard, a graveyard not too far from where this circle is. And Chelle and some other sensitive people in our group, when we were out there for the first night, felt some spirits in the area. So we're not sure yet if it's, people who have been here before or if the land itself is just very fae-like.
It felt no. Layla is downplaying this. What it felt like when we walked out to this part of her land. Have you ever walked into a party of like 100 people and you weren't really invited and you walk into the party and everybody stops talking, the music the music stops and everybody just staring at you like, what are you doing here? That's the feeling. That's what was happening. We walked in on a spiritual party that we weren't invited to.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting piece of property. I do love it here, but we'll save the ghost or no ghost discussion on my property for another time. But you can feel places like this when you walk into these liminal spaces, into these old growth places or wild spaces. You can feel the fae there.
See, now me, I personally connect with them. I feel like the most near water and in the woods. That's just a me thing.
Yes.
But I agree with that. There are times, you can go walking in the woods and it's, you're just tooling along. And then you'll hit a pocket of area where it just feels different. And again, you almost feel like you're being watched, but not being watched by an actual human, not being watched like you're being stalked by an animal, not that kind of being watched, but that the little people are watching you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the good folk are very common in outdoor spaces. You can find them all over. And even in water, there's the sprites, there's mermaids are a type of fae. There's the selkies, which is a Welsh tradition. They look like seals, but they come up on land and then they take their seal skin off and they're a woman. And legend says that if you steal that seal skin, that she's stuck in human form and she'll stay with you.
Are sirens considered fae?
I think so.
Okay.
They're not all nice. I mean, these sirens, they lure sailors to their death, right?
Well, yeah. Any of them can turn on a dime, even a troll.
Yeah, and I know I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I know there's a Swedish type of fae. It's called the Naken, and they drown people. Like if you go out and you see one of these Nakens, I apologize.
We're famous for mispronunciations, folks.
I tried to find somebody pronouncing it and I couldn't. So if anyone knows how to pronounce it, please let me know. But yeah, they drown you, and some of them will make you keep dancing forever. The fae are associated with some very scary stories. They're not all nice. Grimm's fairy tales. If you read the original Grimm's fairy tales, they are not the Disney-fied versions.
Right.
A lot of these are scary.
But again, the appearance might be scary, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't work with them. And again, I think it all comes down to that give and take.
I think it does too. And I think it's a lot that it's not that they're mean, it's that we don't understand them. These energies are very, very old. It's the energies of the stones, of the trees, of the very land itself.
They have a different wisdom level than us.
Yeah, and they have a different way of looking at things. So I think that if you look at it through that lens, then it's a little easier to deal with them. And if you look at them, like you keep saying, give and take, Chelle, and that's so important. If you look at this like a partnership, I am in stewardship of this land with you.
Right.
Meditate with them. What can I offer you? What can I do to care for this space better?
Because I think that's the most important thing to successful work with the fae is going into it with that mindset. Because if you kind of go into it, you're going to do my bidding, you're fucked, man. You are fucked before you start. Okay.
Yeah, these are ancient energies. They are an extension of the earth herself. It's very old, powerful energies.
I'm just saying, fuck around and find out. You fuck with the fae once, you never do it again. You pissed off the fae once, you will work your lifetime to never piss the fae off again.
I would say probably many lifetimes because they're not going to forget. So what can you do if you want to connect with the fae? We did a ritual one time. It was more of a like a journey to Avalon. We wanted to go to the island of Avalon to talk to the
We
fairies
called it
there.
a dream walk.
We did. We did several dream walks. It was almost like one a summer for a little while. We would do a very elaborate, intense ritual. And this one involved a lot of preparation, a lot of meditation. The idea was we were going to journey to Avalon in this ritual slash meditation dream walk to get the knowledge of Avalon. And because we were going through the veil into this liminal space, we went to this magical land and into a river, to a very small, small island in the center of this river, where our coven cast circle. And then we each took our coven cords, tied one end to the
This was
handle.
very important, by the way.
Yeah.
This was an important step, by the way.
So in the middle of this, as we're preparing to cross over this space, we tied one end of our cord to our athames and one end to our ankle. And then before we crossed into the circle, we struck the athame into the ground. Each of these had some iron in them. Now, iron is
Like
considered
tying us to the
to the real
correct
world,
world.
tying us to this realm as we crossed into the circle. Now, I have chills just thinking about this ritual. This was a very beautiful, very powerful ritual. It was absolutely amazing. And while I wouldn't say that I necessarily got all the knowledge of Avalon, it was still a very beautiful, very moving and powerful ritual. But we did the iron thing and the cords because iron is considered like kryptonite to elves and to the fae, to fairies. And I think because it is so much a human thing, cold iron is something we have created. It's so much part
Right.
of our world.
It's almost against everything that is a part of their world.
I looked and looked and looked while we were talking about doing this episode to see if I could find where that came from. Like, where originally did the idea that the fae are deathly allergic to iron come from? And I couldn't find it.
Can't find anything.
No, there's a few theories out there, and I think most of them are what we said, Chelle, that it's so human. Like, we rip iron ore up out of the earth. It's such an industrial thing, and we turn it into tools and into machines so that we can, farm and do things to the earth, to plow the earth, to go to war.
Which is, again, against everything that is in the world. Yeah.
So I think it's just symbolically something that's like their kryptonite. So we did that to tether us here, to tie us here. So that was a beautiful...
Because that's the other thing. I don't want to say the fae can kidnap you into their world, but the fae can kidnap you into their world.
And there's a lot of stories of that. There's the changeling babies that they thought sometimes the fae would come in and steal a healthy human baby and leave a weak or sickly fae child in its place.
Yep.
And while a lot of that was probably people back in the day trying to deal with birth defects or low birth weight or, problems with their population rather than the fae, that theory is in many, many cultures. It's not just the Welsh and Celtic fairies that do this. All sorts of fairies in all sorts of countries steal people away.
Right, right.
There's the idea that if you spend time in the fairyland, that time runs differently under hill than it does here.
I agree. And that's why for that ritual, we made sure to tether ourselves back into the real world so that we had, quote unquote, a path back home.
Right. And so we wouldn't get caught. There's Rip Van Winkle or all these other people who went into the land of the fae and danced, spent the night and danced for hours. And when they came back, decades had passed.
Right.
So you have to watch out because time runs differently. And I think that kind of goes back to these are earth energies. These are energies of the world that are very, very old. So imagine that it runs a lot, slower for them than it does for us.
Right.
Most rituals or spells that talk about working with the fae or with genus loci talk about respect and approaching it with caution. Why wouldn't you want to approach Mother Earth or any of her energies with respect,
Right.
So bring offerings. Like Chelle said, sweets are good offerings. Anything that nourishes the land. If you want to bring a little bit of moon water that you have collected, or if you have compost or, something that's good for the land.
Another thing I've done with water sprites is I've gotten old seashells and filled them with juice and put glitter in the juice.
Oh, that's pretty. I would like that.
Isn't that pretty?
And there's all sorts of biodegradable glitters out there that are super, super pretty, or edible glitters, things like that.
Edible glitters. You can get glitter in the baking aisle because they have like glitter for baking cakes and decorating cakes. So you can get that glitter and put that in some juice in a seashell. Frickin' looks cute. And, the water sprites love it.
One of the things that I used to do with my kids, I read in an old green egg magazine, and it was called Fairy Chess. And basically, it's you take a stump or a rock or just a clear spot, and you grab natural things from around you, pine cones, leaves, dropped flowers, little stones, and you just kind of arrange them in a pretty way. That's a really nice way to honor the fairies of the place. You don't want to pick up stones that might house creatures under them or anything like that. No stacked standing stones. But if you take a few dropped sticks or acorns or leaves or anything like that, and you arrange that into a nice little pattern, that can be a nice way to honor the fae of that area or to do a little spell.
Create a little sitting space for them.
And I've seen some really beautiful mandala art done with natural found things. Don't take anything living unless you ask, and only take a third of it if you do. But you can find all sorts of dropped items to create little magical artwork of natural things to honor the fae in that area.
I've actually seen people take birdhouses and they've modified the birdhouses and turned it into like a little fairy house. I think there's a cute damn idea to have create a little fairy house in your yard, build them a little house. But I've seen some really cute ones done that were done out of birdhouses.
Things like that, you can put little crystals or plants, a bird seed, other little gifts for the fae. Now, there are some legends that say anything that you put out for the fairies should not be made by your hands. The reason for that is because anything that you make holds your energy.
It links them to you, basically.
So if you want to, leave something for the fae, but you don't necessarily need it to be linked back to you, or you don't want any bad repercussions to come back to you, then make sure that it's something that's not made by you. Also, right. Kind of going along with that a little bit, another caution that people have about the fae is to not tell them your real name.
Yes, I've heard that, because if you tell them your real name, they have control over you.
If someone has your name, they can magically, in a lot of ways, cast spells on you or control you in some way. There are some magical traditions that think that people with your name can have a lot of power over you.
Right.
And your real name might not necessarily be your legal name. It could be a name that you've chosen.
Right.
Some people think that everyone has a real name and you have to discover it throughout your life. So you might not even know your true name. But yeah, so knowing your name is something that the little people definitely will try to get from you in some cases so that they can have power over you.
Don't do it, people. Don't do it.
But connecting them is pretty easy. You can do things like I've done, which is basically to walk around and any place on my land that feels energetic or that feels like it has, even if it's just pretty, I'll just sit there and choose that spot and kind of meditate, try to connect. Basically just kind of sit and do a grounding meditation, connect literally, do that whole roots thing into the ground. Maybe lean against a tree or try to touch these things as you're trying to mentally connect with that energy as well.
It's funny because this past week, you and I have talked about this. I had my 2-year-old grandson for a week. Whoa, was that exhausting. So, I take him outside and we're playing outside and he's running around. And we have this big, huge tree in our side yard. And he runs over to this tree. And there's this little hole. It almost looked carved. It was actually kind of weird. But there was this little hole in the bark. And of course, he's 2 and his eyes point right on this. And he's trying to stick his finger in the hole. And I'm like, baby, don't stick your finger in the hole. That's somebody's house. And because I said it was somebody's house and he's 2, he pulls back and he goes, hello.
Oh, how cute.
So then we're sitting there and I go, and so then of course I go, yes, hello, tree. And then we sit there for 5 minutes. Hello, tree. Hello, tree. But it was so cute because he tried to stick his finger in that hole. And I'm like, that's somebody's house, baby. And it probably was. The tree sprites lived in that little hole, and my grandson should not be sticking his finger in the front door.
Right? Who knows what they're going to do? Those little knots in trees definitely look like fairy houses.
They do.
The other thing that gets me is the fairy rings of mushrooms.
That's absolutely a definite. Yeah.
I love those. And, I get mushrooms a little bit because I understand that underneath the ground is really where the mushroom kind of lives. So them coming up in circles kind of makes a little bit of sense when those flowers pop up in circles for no apparent reasons. I think those are fairy portals. I'm pretty sure.
Honestly, whenever I see anything like that, I do not put my feet, I do not step foot in the middle of the circle. It's like, it's got to be a fairy portal, damn it. I
Mm-hmm.
insist.
Yeah, I think so too. I think those are great places to leave offerings if you're lucky enough to get one. Make sure your offerings are biodegradable. You can leave coins, but make sure they don't have iron or anything like that. But better to leave something natural.
I like the acorn top full of honey myself. I thought
Yeah.
that was the damn best invention I ever came up with.
So I think after all that, after having gone through all of that, there is a little bit of fuck around and find out with the Fae, but I don't think you really have to go so far as to never allow the tooth fairy into your home or never honor the spirits of place. If the tooth fairy is something that you do at your house, if you're honoring that tradition in your household, I don't think that's something that you have to worry about. I don't think that's going to be inviting any tricksters into your home. And as a magical practitioner, you shouldn't be entering into work with something that you're afraid of.
Right.
But I think if you do your research beforehand, there's no reason to be afraid of fae or of fairies. There is reason to be cautious and to know what you're doing, have your wits about you, and certainly walk with intention, with power, and with purpose. But other than that, I think you're fine.
If you're looking to work with the Fae and you're kind of a big city dweller and you're like, well, I don't have a lot of outdoor space, I have nowhere to go. We get it totally. If you have a little like window garden or like little plants in your windows where they can kind of cross through that veil and play, create something like a flower bed or a little like a garden thing hanging from your window. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. Or if you have like house plants, I've had a couple of friends that have made like little fairy altars within a house plant. So if you don't have outdoor space, that shouldn't deter you from working with the Fae. You just got to maybe create something a tad natural within your space.
Yeah. And you can also check in with your apartment, check in with your house. Even if it's in a city, there still can be energies there. You might have to look a little deeper than someone who can walk barefoot in the grass, but they can still be there. And some of these energies are very, very old and very
They're just a little
powerful.
harder to find, I think, that in that environment.
Yeah, they might be harder to wake up, but odds are you can connect with it. You might just have to try a little bit harder. You can use certain crystals and flowers to attract these types of energies to you.
Isn't jasmine one of them? I think jasmine is a fairy attractor.
Violets, honeysuckle, daisies, crystals like moonstone, moss agate, opals, amethysts.
I like to use the moss agate because for some reason it makes me think of like ferns and moss make me think of fairies, and it goes from there.
Yeah, yeah. And my favorite, rosemary, lavender, mugwort, these types of herbs can all help to bring them into your space. If you want to call them or banish them, I would say the first thing to do is to cleanse your space, like literally clean your house and cleanse it with the intent of either honoring the spirits of that place, calling them in or honoring them, or telling them to get the fuck out. So either
Shut the
way,
door on them.
shut the door on them, cleanse your space, and then set up an altar to honor them if that's your intent. Or grab your basome and your banishing herbs, and at the end of cleansing your house,
Sweep them away.
sweep them right out. And then lock your windows, lock your doors with your sigils. You can use bird seed. You could use rice. You could use a broom. I think we talked about this a little bit with Amy Blackthorne, but mystical creatures often get distracted. But if you put like a broom or something outside your door to protect from the fae, that will stop them because they have to count all the bristles before they can come in.
I've also heard that that's some of the lore behind folks having horseshoes up because the horseshoe was made out of the metal that basically staved them off. They
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
want to cross that threshold because they didn't want to cross under that iron of a horseshoe.
I've also heard of some people taking like horseshoe nails or iron nails and
Right.
hammering 3 of them above your door. That's a pretty powerful protection right there. But something
Yeah.
as simple as bird seed laid across your threshold or herbs. You don't have to use salt. Salt can be very damaging. So if you're worried about that, there's other options. But basically, it's tiny grains of something that you have imbued with intent. And then the fae will get trapped and have to count all those little tiny grains. And then the by the time they've counted them, the spell has worked and asked them to leave. So those are ways you can call them in or banish them if you need to. But it's a good idea if you are asking them to be in your space that you honor them regularly. Leave offerings on the altar or in that outdoor space that you have created. Offer them smoke, offer them food, offer them your not thanks, but offer them, hey, this is appreciation freely given. Nothing that's going to make an obligation to you or to them. But, make it a little nice for them and offer them a few sweets and they'll be pretty happy. And it'll stop them from stealing your credit cards.
Yeah, there's that.
There's so many different kinds of fae, and I know we haven't even barely scratched the surface of all the different types of fae and folklore and legends on them that are out there.
But we will, because we have a little surprise coming up pretty soon. We're going to be doing a solarium episode with we're not going to tell you what kind of book on the fae.
Ooh, and we might even have a giveaway to go along with it. So stay tuned for that here in the next month or so. But yeah, we will revisit fairies and the fae because there is so much. Oh my goodness.
We'll cover that the next time.
Thank you so much for listening to our episode on fairies.
We want you to remember, like, share, comment, send us some mails. You can find us at Back on the Broomstick on Facebook, Back on the Broomstick on Instagram. You can email us at backonthebroomstick@gmail.com. And if you are not aware and are interested, we also have some lovely listeners who have a Facebook group discussion. Layla, tell them what that Facebook page is called.
Yes, if you look up Back on the Broomstick podcast discussion group on Facebook, we have a few hundred of our closest friends hanging out there, talking all things witchcraft and the podcast.
Which, by the way, we love you all.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you to our benefactors. We really appreciate it. Now, Chelle and I are going to be very busy this summer, going to all sorts of festivals and events. So hopefully we will see you there.
Come see us. And if you do come see us, will you be like, hey, I'm a listener?
Yeah, please say hi. We love that shit. And we will jump up and down with joy. Also, we have a few people who have sent in gifts to us. We've got some earrings, we've got some books, we've got a bunch of surprises. So thank you guys so much for sending those in. We're going to do a special solarium where we do, I guess, a mailbag roll call or something. We'll dive into our mailbox and see all the lovely things that you guys have sent to us.
Oh, we've never done that before. That'll be so fun.
That will be fun. So thank you guys. That's really freaking cool. And if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, go ahead and send it to us. I'll put a link to our mailing address in the show notes if you want to get in on that. But otherwise, we will see you next week on Back on the Broomstick. Stay wise, stay wicked,
and keep it witchy, folks.